My 2 children, and they'll never get to meet him. Say hi! But I'll tell them how much that he would have loved them.
Henny Fenlon's dad, Robert, never lived to see his daughter become a mother or meet the baby she named after him.
I remember he loved books and history, and I know that he loved me loads.
Henny's dad, Robert, was on remand for stealing at HMP Woodhill in Milton Keynes in March 2016 when she heard he'd been taken to hospital. He was on life support after hanging himself in his cell. She was just 14.
I remember it like yesterday. I remember I was at my friend's house and my mum rang me and said, your dad's in hospital, but she didn't say why. And then she rang back and said why, so I've got up and I was panicking. Went straight home, got a taxi to Milton Keynes Hospital, and they said we need to turn his machine off, and I think I didn't want to at all, no. I was saying no to the nurses.
Robert Fenlon, who was 36 with a long history of mental health and addiction problems, may have taken his own life. But a catalogue of devastating failings by prison staff has now led to an unprecedented conclusion from an inquest jury that his death in a state-run prison amounted to an unlawful killing. The charity Inquest has been supporting the family through the long wait for answers.
We've often said that state neglect kills, and the significance of the unlawful killing conclusion of this jury should send shockwaves across the prison service, and it should make prison ministers and the Secretary of State look very, very carefully at what is happening in our prisons.
The jury was told there were a series of self-inflicted deaths at Woodhill before Robert Fenlon died, and concluded there were serious failures by the prison to implement recommendations to better protect vulnerable prisoners like Robert. On the 26th of February, Robert Fenlon passes a note under his cell door saying he's in total despair and considering suicide. A safety plan is put in place. But on the 3rd of March, he's found with a ligature in his cell. He should have been put under constant supervision. He wasn't. The next day, he's found again, this time tied up with a ligature. No change to his level of risk is recorded, and on the 5th, he's found hanging and unresponsive in his cell. The jury was told how one senior officer, having been told Robert Fenlon had tried to hang himself, finished his lunch before going to see him and then took no further action to keep him safe. Another was found to have lied. The inquest exposed a culture of neglect at Woodhill and an inability to look after at-risk prisoners. But this is not a problem consigned to history. In the past decade, 28 men have taken their own lives here, the latest in November. Despite a series of highly critical inquests, damning inspection reports and reviews, many recommendations have still not been implemented. Last year, the Chief Inspector of Prisons issued an urgent notification about Woodhill, saying it was an unsafe prison with the highest rates of self-harm in all men's jails. The response from prison leaders, he said, was simply inadequate.
Well, I'm going to go now, Babs. Be good for your mum, please, and be nice to her, and don't be cheeky. Love you, Daddy.
We first met Henny 8 years ago, just after her father had died. A bereaved teenager crying out for change.
You need to look after the prisoners better. And if they're feeling down, get them to talk to someone. Put them on a suicide watch. Watch them 24/7. Because it's not them that have to deal with everything at the end of the day, it's me. I'm the only thing really is left behind.
Do you believe, from what you now know, that your father's death could have been prevented?
Yeah, could have been prevented. So many different ways it could have been prevented. You just think, why didn't you help him? Why did you leave him with things that could harm him in his cell? I just think, why have that job? You know what the job's about, you have to look after them and care for them, and you're just not doing that. I don't understand why. Go get a different job.
After such a damning inquest conclusion, the hope now for family and campaigners is that it will finally lead to some accountability.
What I think it shows is the utter culture of contempt and complacency towards these avoidable deaths that are taking place in the care of the state, where the state has a duty to protect life. And in my view, the shocking conclusion that has come out of this inquest should result in a corporate manslaughter prosecution, because the lack of accountability is unacceptable and it is criminal.
A prison service spokesperson said, "Our thoughts remain with the family and friends of Robert Fenlon. We will consider the findings of the coroner's report and will respond with our actions in due course."
Put them first, because that's somebody's dad, somebody's son, somebody's brother, and they are people who are loved, and they wasn't given a death sentence, they were just given a prison sentence, so yeah.
Camera.
Henny's had to learn to live with the fact her baby will never know his granddad. She'd like to be sure Woodhill and all prisons will learn the lessons from her father's death. And on that, she's not convinced.
Well, I spoke earlier to the former Director General of England and Wales's Prison Service, Phil Wheatley, and I started by asking him who should be held accountable for Robert Fenlon's death.
Well, the inquest has enabled the facts to be revealed and for the coroner to direct the jury and the jury to come to a conclusion. The accountability for crime is obviously a matter for the police and the prosecution authorities. I do know about the general background at Woodhill, which has been very difficult for running a stable prison, really from 2015 onwards. And since then, it has slid inspection by inspection, review by review, with the underlying problem being that they've never been able to recruit enough staff to run the place properly and safely.
Exactly, and safely, the family, the inquest has now ruled, contributed to the death of this prisoner.
Running a prison safely is always crucial and never to be underestimated. And you run safe prisons by having a stable regime that gives prisoners enough choice and enough activity to break up their time, to make their imprisonment feel bearable, enough interventions to deal with the many problems that prisoners bring, and that includes substance abuse problems and mental health problems, and enough specialist staff to provide the support that those prisoners will need.
There were a series of self-inflicted deaths at Woodhill before Robert Fenlon died. There have been deaths afterwards. There are huge questions for the whole prison estate about the lack of accountability. When something like this goes wrong, who takes responsibility?
No prison will be safe unless it has sufficient staff and sufficient experienced staff who know what they're doing. If that isn't provided, and that is largely a matter of resourcing, it's a combination of resourcing and the amount of demand, the number of prisoners who turn up. If that doesn't happen, no prison will be safe. And that requires the government to resource prisons to a level that can make them safe. And that hasn't happened.
And that isn't happening across a number of prisons.
And I'd ask you, is the Minister appearing on this programme? Probably not. And you probably haven't managed to get a Minister to appear in the programme because there's a reluctance to actually deal with the problem of resourcing. And I understand the problem. It's the time of austerity and difficulty. But really, locking people up should be done properly and needs to be properly resourced.
And you come back to exactly that point about accountability, about who takes responsibility for this. Now, campaigners are calling for corporate manslaughter charges to be brought against the prison service because of what happened at Woodhill. That would force accountability, wouldn't it? Do you think that that is what should happen?
I wouldn't like to judge that. I don't know how that would work. It hasn't been done before. I do know that the prison service doesn't decide what its resources are. They are given as a result of government ministerial decisions. And I do know the prison service doesn't decide on sentencing policy and how many prisoners are going to come. That, again, is a result of ministerial and political decisions and changes in the law. There's one going through the Parliament at the moment. And so I'm not sure how you get accountability from the prison service for things that they aren't responsible for.
Would you take the job at Woodhill?
I wouldn't take the job at Woodhill at the moment. I think any governor who took on Woodhill at the moment would find that they were struggling to recruit staff and couldn't make it safe. Though, to be fair, the government and ministers have agreed this, I understand, have agreed that there will be some temporary reduction in the number of prisoners at Woodhill.
Robert Fenlon's daughter talks about an inability to see prisoners as fathers, sons, brothers, people who are loved, people who deserve proper care.
I started my service as a young prison officer in 1969, the days of slopping out in Leeds prison, when it was grossly overcrowded and nothing happened except prisoners got exercised once a day. That was about the height of it. And prison staff at Leeds at that time formed the opinion that prisoners were fairly worthless people because the system treated them as though they were. You have to make the system treat them properly and have the ability to do that if you want to have staff who understand that they've got a much more sophisticated role to play than just being custodians, locking people up, and learn to get involved with prisoners and to understand them. And you also need to have a steady staff who stay there long enough to know the prisoners and gain the respect of prisoners and gain respect from prisoners.
Phil Wheatley, thank you very much for talking to us.